Kenta Maeda is officially a Detroit Tiger. Officially. Announced by the team on Tuesday. We're going to talk about Scott Harris's media availability, some of the quotes, and interesting conversations that came out of that. We're going to talk about a promotion within the organization that I think is super fun and needs to be highlighted. And then we're going to talk about something the Milwaukee Brewers are rumored to maybe do, and how if they do it, it could affect how all teams operate. Let's talk about it all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, November 29th, 2023. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Alrighty, well, happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic start to your week. Today, we are going to discuss, like I said, the Scott Harris media availability. The team announced officially that Kenta Maeda was signed. Some interesting tidbits in there, some interesting quotes. I think it's fascinating how the Tigers did release the news, like really small stuff that's very different from how this team has been ran forever. And I just want to talk about those really quickly. So we'll discuss some of that. We have a promotion to talk about. Brayan Pena will no longer be the manager of the West Michigan Whitecaps, but because he is on to bigger and better things within the organization still, I love Brayan Pena. I think he's genuinely one of the best coaches in this organization. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to end the show. A big chunk of the second half of this show is going to be discussing something the Brewers may do in terms of a contract that it's rumored they may give out. It hasn't happened yet, but if they do it, it could set a whole new precedent for how teams manage players and sign young players. And if there's anyone on the Tigers that kind of fits the bill as well. Okay, so we're going to start off with this Scott Harris media availability. It was announced by the club on Tuesday that Kenta Maeda was officially signed by the Detroit Tigers, straight from the horse's mouth there. So, this was obviously we knew he was signed and everything. There's a couple of things I want to point out here. One is just how they announced the signing. I don't know how many people noticed how they announced the signing, but the Detroit Tigers official Twitter account posted that they had signed him. That's not like super common practice. It's not uncommon necessarily, but it's not super common. And on top of that, they did the Braves thing a little bit, where not only with the Kenta Maeda is making an annual donation to the Tigers Foundation, totaling $70,000 in 2024 and $50,000 in 2025. So you have that, which is kind of the Braves thing, right? That's the big joke, is that 1% of everybody's salary on the Braves roster goes to the Braves Foundation. We have something similar to that with the Tigers now. Kenta Maeda doing that with, I believe it's 0.5% of his yearly salary. But I think the thing that is fascinating is that they released in the welcome and the introductory tweet the exact salary number. Complete transparency. The tweet reads as follows: coming to the 313, we have agreed to terms with right-handed pitcher Kenta Maeda on a 2-year contract worth $24 million. Maeda will make $14 million in 2024 and $10 million in 2025. We even have the year to year. Like we know exactly. And then we obviously got the follow-up for the Tigers Foundation. That's fascinating to me. And like, that's something that's very, like, not a big deal to a lot of people and very under the radar. That is noteworthy. I think Cody Stavenhagen of The Athletic talked about it. I think Evan Woodbury of M Live talked about it as well. Like, this is something that a lot of people in the industry appreciate. I think players appreciate it. I think that agents especially appreciate the transparency. That was just something that I found very, very fascinating with this entire press release. And so I wanted to start off with that. Just the way that they announced it, I thought was pretty fascinating. Then we have Scott Harris taking questions, some media availability with him. And I think there's also not a ton of like groundbreaking stuff, like quote, we wanted to add a veteran presence in our rotation that could help us win games and influence our young starters. Great. Awesome. That I would hope so. That should be the goal for probably everybody that you sign. Like a lot of GM speak stuff that we'll, take at kind of face value here. Find ways to make our staff deeper and better overall. That was something we'll talk about that here in a second. Evan Petzold and Evan Woodbury both kind of hinted at and released this quote and kind of hinted somewhat at the fact, or Scott Harris rather hinted that they may not be done adding pitching, which is something we've talked about each of the last 2 days on this episode. So we'll talk about that here in a second on this show, not this episode. And yeah, the only other thing I really thought was kind of noteworthy in these questions was the fact that they really felt comfortable offering 2 years. Obviously, he's not going to say, we felt really uncomfortable, but like we wanted to get him, so we just did it. So again, like kind of, take it for what it is, take it at face value there. But that was nice. I think that the only other thing that really jumped out to me was how aggressive they were in Maeda specifically. There was a report out there that the Twins only would have been interested in bringing back Maeda if it was much later on in the offseason. So the proactive kind of like go out and get your guy approach by Scott Harrison, by this front office, I think is the reason that Kenta Maeda is a Detroit Tiger before December, right? And it is honestly a Detroit Tiger, period. It sounds like there was a few clubs that probably would have been interested in him had they've been able to wait through winter meetings and let the market shape out a little bit more. But the Tigers really, really liked Maeda. They liked what he brings. That Scott Harris mentioned about 1 million times how much he appreciates what he's going to bring the younger players on the team. The big thing for me is he throws a splitter. Our former number 1 overall pick had a very famous splitter. I kind of like that a little bit. Let's have Kenta Maeda and like one of the best splitters in all of baseball, maybe rub elbows with Casey Mize a little bit. I certainly don't mind that. But just talked about the profile. We talked about that the last couple of days. Doesn't allow too many walks, has a lot of swing and miss stuff. Kind of fits what the Tigers are trying to do. Said he appreciates how he can attack all parts of the strike zone. That's something that obviously not every pitcher excels at, but something that, again, like he's not going to say, oh, well, we don't like how Kenta Maeda doesn't attack all parts of the strike zone. So it kind of is what it is with a lot of the GM speak stuff. But I did appreciate the peek behind the curtain really throughout this entire process. The fact that we're learning that we went after Maeda aggressive and early, right, in the offseason, but also just the press release I thought was kind of fascinating as well. So Kenta Maeda officially a Detroit Tiger. He will be in this rotation in 2024. 2 thumbs up for that. We're pretty, I'm pleased about it. We've talked about it at length the last couple of days. Don't need to go back down that rabbit hole again. One quote I did want to get a little more focused on was the quote about potentially looking for more starting pitching. Okay. We'll talk about that right after this. FanDuel. We have talked about FanDuel. We talked about at the beginning of this show. I tell y'all about how great FanDuel is almost every day, and you can continue to score this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better place to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Will the Detroit Pistons ever win a basketball game ever again? Well, they're going to be plus money in a lot of games. Maybe we take a look at I'm not even going to go down that road. We're not going to take a look at the Pistons probably winning too much from here on out, but there is still a lot of fun NBA action. There's a ton of NFL action. Obviously, the season is in the home stretch now, and we have a lot of player awards that are really neck and neck. We have a lot of teams, like all but 3 teams are pretty much still in the playoff hunt at this point in the season. It's a great time to get in on all the action at FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate y'all for tuning in, making us your first listen every day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow, finally talking about the bullpen. I've been wanting to talk about the bullpen since like last Friday, but stuff just keeps happening. We keep having news, which is great. I'm never gonna be upset at stuff to talk about and of additions that are made in the offseason and whatnot. So, barring another Tigers move over the next 24 hours, tomorrow's episode will be about kind of breaking down the bullpen, talk about what the impression of the bullpen is going into 2024, if there's anything they can do this winter to kind of address some needs, how much of a priority is the bullpen, et cetera, et cetera. That will be tomorrow's episode. Today, we're talking about Kenta Maeda, we're talking about Brayan Pena, and we're talking about the Milwaukee Brewers. Before we move on to the rest of the stuff, we'll kind of put a bow on this Scott Harris media availability with this quote. This one is from Evan Woodbury, again, of M Live. He says, "We're going to keep looking to add pitching. You'll never hear me say that we have enough pitching. I don't even believe it's possible to have enough pitching. We're going to see what's available and if we can find more ways to make our staff deeper and better." 2, 3, 4 thumbs up, right? If I had 7 thumbs, they'd all be up. That is music to my ears as the person who has been shouting from the mountaintops for the last 7 months about how this offseason the Tigers need more innings out of their starting rotation. I love to hear this. I love that they're going to continue to be aggressive in the starting pitching market. I hope that that's not just GM speak and that it is actually what's going to happen. I will say that yesterday's show is still very prevalent in my brain, dog. I really do think that there's a big opportunity to make a splash if you continue to add starting pitching and then start to use some of those, abundance of resources to your advantage by trading for a bat in a year in which free agency has not very many bats available to you. And I think that you can kind of 2 birds, 1 stone it by continuing to add starting pitching so you continue to get more innings while also addressing a big need, which is going to continue to be bats. I know we did a whole future of third base episode a week or 2 ago. And I know I hinted heavily and we talked about it a lot on here, just that I think the clubhouse leader for third base is still Jace Young being the third baseman by like July, not on opening day. And it's probably some like Ibanez, McKinstry, Vierling platoon until Jace Young is ready. But at the end of the day, if they can make a move and get a infielder period that is a good hitter, I think you have to entertain that. And it starts with acquiring more and more starting pitching. And if you don't make a trade and you want to stand pat, then you have innings, which is never a bad thing. I completely agree with this quote. And I'm glad that we got that little soundbite there. Okay, let's move on to Brayan Pena. Brayan Pena, former Detroit Tiger player, former Major League Baseball player, obviously former catcher, has been the manager of the West Michigan Whitecaps for the last 3 seasons. I believe he got hired when A.J. Hinch, he got put in that position at that role, at least when A.J. Hinch took over in 2021. So that is, I believe that's the last 3 seasons he has been the manager of the Whitecaps. And that's in high single A, obviously. And so he has been promoted to be the new minor league catching coordinator for the Detroit Tigers. And I really just want to give Brayan Pena his flowers. There is not a single person that has been around Brayan Pena or played for Brayan Pena that has had anything bad to say. I genuinely think he's a rising star in this industry. I don't expect him to be like around in the Tigers organization for like the next like 20 years, because I expect him to get poached at some point from another team to go on to bigger and bigger roles. I think that highly of him. I think he's done a fantastic job at West Michigan. All of the players absolutely adore him. I can't say enough good things about Brayan Pena, and I think it's truly a testament to how good he is at his job that he is now the catching coordinator in an organization whose manager at the major league level, and don't get it twisted, has heavy input in all of these decisions, was a major league catcher and understands the value of catcher, right? AJ Hinch was obviously a catcher and knows the value and the role that brings, and how important it is to have a good, confident game caller and defender behind home plate, and for him to again absolutely have input in this decision. To make Brayan Pena the new minor league catching coordinator. He will be the guy that, getting him hands-on work with Dylan Dingler for the first time since Dingler probably was, like in his post-draft season. All of this is great. And he's also going to be the manager of the Cuban professional team of immigrated players that will soon participate in the Intercontinental Series in Colombia at the end of January in 2024. So like he just keeps getting opportunities. He's so well respected in the industry. I'm just such a big fan of him, and I wanted to give him a congratulations on here because I think he absolutely deserves it. And I think he's a very overlooked and not talked about rising star in the coaching industry. I really believe that. So 2 thumbs up for that. Cool to see him get a promotion there. We got some interesting catching prospects as well. Dylan Dingler, Crouch didn't have a great year this past year, but is someone that 2 years ago a lot of people really liked. And obviously just like the catchers, the young catchers that are at the major league level, Jake Rogers, not exactly young, but still, I'm very interested in how Pena will do in this new role. So, okay, let's move on to the Milwaukee Brewers. This is absolutely fascinating to me. Okay, and this will be what the rest of the show is about. There was a report. I got the notification via Bleacher Report, but I believe that the initial report that they got it from was from Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic. Just trying to go down the train and work backwards and figure out who the initial source of the report was. I believe it's Ken Rosenthal. If he got it from someone else, I'm sure it'll be in his article again on The Athletic. But the report is Brewers Jackson Chourio, the number 2 MLB prospect, in, quote, landmark contract talks. That is an article that came out on Tuesday, yesterday, if you're listening to this on Wednesday. And Rosenthal implied a lot here, said that the largest agreement for a player with no major league experience is currently Luis Robert Jr.'s contract for the Chicago White Sox, who right in the COVID 2020 season got a $50 million contract on 6 years. That is this whole thing is fascinating to me. So let's start with the Robert contract. Luis Robert Jr. That's what, 8.5 AAV, 8.3, somewhere around there. AAV as far as annual salary goes. 6 years. That's exactly takes you to pre-arb, post-arb, and then he would be a free agent. Now, that one has, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Robert Jr. contract has a team option or some sort of option slapped onto the end of that as well. But it is worth noting that like 6 years, right, that just taking you through arbitration and the pre-arb process, goodness, makes all the sense in the world for the player. You're going to get much more money that way in the first 3-4 years of your career. And then if you're a really good player, then you're on a little bit of a discount deal for years 5 and 6, but you will have made a boatload more than you ever would have if you didn't sign that type of contract in the first 3 to 4 years. And if you end up not being as highly touted or reaching your full ceiling, then you're just getting more money than you would have thought in the first 6. So like 8.5 is not, I think the general rule these days, it changes all the time. But the general rule these days is in free agency, like every 12 mil is worth 1 WAR. And that's super loose and like not like a that's not gospel, right? Like not every front office is like, yes, this is the way. And this is like the only way type of thing. But like that's a general kind of vibe in today's day and age of baseball that most people kind of use as a benchmark at least. So like the Robert Jr. contract, I think made sense for both sides. This one is reported to be more money and also longer term. according to Ken Rosenthal. The exact quote is, quote, would be longer and guarantee him more money. And this is all despite the fact that he has played 6 games above the AA level. So I want to talk about the precedent that this is going to set, and then also talk about, as far as the Detroit Tigers go, is there anyone in the organization that has not made their major league debut yet that you would be comfortable giving this type of contract to? We're going to go over some names. Okay? We will talk about that right after this. All right, everybody, welcome back. Your third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate y'all for tuning in greatly. Be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today show. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts and Locked On national shows as well, covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Okay? Be sure to check it out for real. It is absolutely awesome. So we are talking about the Brewers, talking about this potentially, again, Ken Rosenthal used the word landmark type of deal. If it's longer, that is a big deal, right? If you start adding years to that and you start chipping away at potentially free agent eligible years, that's never been done, right? To a guy who hasn't played Major League Baseball before. We've seen like the big deals after like a rookie season or after like 2 years, right? We're starting to see a lot more of those in baseball the last 5-10 years. But this truly would be a new precedent being set. And I think that that's so fascinating. And I just, the game of baseball is so beautiful because it is ever evolving. And everybody's always trying to find the next thing that gets you the advantage, right? People like that. That's why everybody loves the Moneyball movies. And there's so many, there's 30 front offices all trying to achieve the same thing and all trying to go about it a different way to have a leg up on their competition. And this would be just the next in line. And obviously I want to talk about it with y'all because I want to talk about everything baseball related with all of you. But like the relating it to the Tigers is fascinating to me, right? Is there anyone in the Tigers organization that this is even a remote conversation for? Because I'm not sure there is. I'm not sure. And like, I don't expect the Tigers to do this, even if you are the biggest like Colt Keith believer on the entire planet. I don't think the Tigers are doing this anytime soon. That's not what this conversation is about. This is not like, oh, the Brewers are doing it. Could the Tigers do it? I would be stunned if the Detroit Tigers took a risk like this in the foreseeable future. Okay. But I do think it's worth the conversation of, is there anyone you would, if your last name was Harris and I guess your first name was Scott, right? Like, is that someone, is there anyone on your radar? Max Clark, certainly no. Too early on in the career. That's off the table. I don't think there's anyone that would like give over again, like guarantee. You're talking about more money and like to convince a young player to give up free agent eligible years, dog. Like that's serious. Like that's where baseball money is made. All right. Like that's been baseball's history for decades, has been, you don't make a whole lot, relatively speaking. Obviously, I would love to make $700K playing baseball, but like relatively speaking, you don't make a whole lot when compared to other baseball players for the first 6 years of your career. Arbitrations help that a little bit. And then you hit free agency, and that's where you get your big contract. I mean, I'm having to think that it can't be more than like 2 years of arbitration, post-arbitration, sorry. I can't imagine that it would be 2 years of post-arb, like free agent off seasons, which is still like an 8-year deal. But like, I can't imagine it's too much more than that. And then AAV, I mean, if it's more than Roberts, and if you're good, I mean, you can make 12, 15 mil in arbitration. I mean, what, are you going to give this dude 15 mil AAV for 8 years? Man, I'm so bad at math. 8 times 15. Goodness, that shouldn't have been that hard. Like, is that 15 AAV for 8 years? But I feel like it kind of has to be even more, but like you're not going to give 20 AAV to somebody who hasn't played a major league game yet, right? But if it's going to be a new kind of precedent more than the Luis Robert thing, it's going to be more than 8.5. You feel me? Like it's just it's so wild. And so when talking about the Tigers, back on track, ADHD brain there, but like Colt Keith is probably the only player that I'd even remotely consider doing this for. And I am the biggest Colt Keith believer you'll meet. I love the kid. I think he's the second baseman of the future. There's a whole different conversation surrounding like how much you want this player to be integrated within the organization, how much you not even like trust or believe, just like financially, like you're gonna guarantee whatever it is, 10, even if it's only 10, $12 million, sure, right? You're gonna guarantee that over, you know what I mean? Like that's, you have a budget every year, right? Scott Harris is definitely given a budget every single offseason from ownership. It says this is the amount of money you have to spend. And it's a fine line because I think that the smaller market teams, and I'm not saying the Tigers are a smaller market team. Illich could go out and spend $200 million a year if he wanted to. But the smaller market teams, if you're not going to spend in free agency, maybe this is like the new way. But baseball is such a bustable sport. Like it is the most bustable sport. Like if you were to have a percentage of the sport that has the most, for lack of a better term, busts in it, people who were drafted really high or were once considered top prospects in baseball that didn't live up to the hype, it's easily baseball. And it's not even really particularly close. That's why there's a million different levels of the minors. You got to reprove yourself over and over and over again in baseball. You going to do that with Jackson Jobe? I don't think any team is doing this with a pitcher. There's just too many pitching injuries these days. I think pitcher is just completely off the table. I don't even think a team would entertain giving a pitcher that is yet to play in the major leagues a contract like this. Jace Young. I mean, this is like the first year he's been like really, really good. And like he was only drafted, a couple of years ago. Like that's not a fault of his own. But he's had like one good minor league season. I don't think you can necessarily do that. Like this guy, we're talking about the Brewers, is the number 2 prospect in the sport, right? He's like one of the best prospects in the game of baseball. Jace Young's the 4th best prospect in the Tigers organization. Kevin McGonigal, no, too young. Ty Madden, certainly not. Wilmer Flores, again, I think pitcher is out the window. Hao-Yu Lee, you just acquired him 6 months ago. Not even. No. Justin Henry Malloy, like no, right? Like, and then you get further and further. Obviously, you're getting down to like players that you're not even sure are going to be like productive Major League Baseball players, period. Once you get down to, further and down this prospect list. The only player I'd consider it is legitimately Colt Keith. And even then, I still don't think I'd do it. And that's not an indictment on my opinion of Colt Keith. It's just like that's a really risky thing to do. And to set aside part of your budget on someone who, like, you don't, I'm not going to say you don't need to, but like, you don't need to. It's really a fascinating conversation. I'm very interested in where y'all stand on this. And just like we'll end the show by just like the new precedent that this could set, right? Like I think I go back and forth. Honestly, like I am incredibly pro player. I feel like if you listen to the shows when the lockout was happening, that was I made that pretty clear. I know that that's not where like everybody stood on those like side of negotiations, and I do fully understand that at one point I think it was both parties' faults. Not blind following anything, but I'm pretty pro player with that kind of stuff, and even if you stand on the other side of the aisle and you're more pro owner, that's totally fine. That's your right to have that opinion and feel that way. My point is, it really goes both ways. Like with this kind of deal, either side could end up happening, right? Like let's say he's really good, okay? let's say they give out this type of deal and he's incredible. Okay. Then other teams are probably going to start doing this. And players are going to get paid even younger. And like that's something that I think has been a pretty big issue in baseball for a while. Has been like it takes, and again, arbitration has helped that a lot. But that's one of the bigger gripes with like athletes when comparing it to other sports. It takes a longer time, including minor league baseball, which is like a huge issues publicly about like how little those guys get paid. There's just it takes a long time to get paid, and obviously it's millions of dollars eventually, and they're top 1%ers at the end of the day, but like it takes a while to get there, and so I think that if he's really good, a lot more players are going to start getting paid younger and younger, and I don't view that as a bad thing. Again, I tend to lean more on the pro like player side of things, but if he's not very good in a very bustable sport, if he doesn't turn out and he doesn't perform, then what happens? Then the pendulum swings the other way. And then teams are going to go, well, we're not making that mistake again. Baseball's far too tricky with predicting talent. It's far too difficult. We're not doing that again. And teams are going to be significantly more cautious with giving anybody a contract pre-arbitration. And it's going to go really dramatically the other way. And I won't blame people, right? Like the only example you have is a failure if that happens. I won't blame teams for doing that at all. So it's such a fine line. It's such a gutsy thing. The one thing that bothers me with it from the Brewers' perspective, and I'm not trying to be like Locked On Brewers here. We already have a great show for that on the network. But the tricky thing for me with them specifically is they're not going to pay the two greatest pitchers in franchise history. And they're going to give that money to a guy who's never played Major League Baseball before. And like he's a very talented prospect, right? If you're in like the prospect circles, like we've been hearing about like this kid since he was very young, right? It's he's very talented. But it's a very, as a team, what you're marketing to free agents and other players and people you draft, I'm not sure that's what you want your team to be marketed as. I'm not sure you want to market your team as the team that plays unproven talent, and once you become a Cy Young caliber, MVP caliber player, see ya. I'm not sure that's the best marketing campaign. And this deal hasn't happened yet. I love this. Like I'm so fascinated with how this is going to turn out. What possibilities could come out of this? What type of precedent it is going to set? I think there's a world of possibilities here. And I really there's a bunch of different angles, and I don't think any of them are all like one side or the other. I think it's a bunch of different unique angles that some are pro and some are cons. I'm so fascinated with this. So I don't think the Tigers are doing this anytime soon, but I do think that it's a fascinating baseball story that, if it does work out, could affect your team very, very soon if it looks like it was a smart move. So we'll see what happens with it. We'll see if it ends up coming to fruition. And that's all I got. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow as always. Be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the 24/7 streaming channel, the first ever 24/7 sports streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow talking about the bullpen, baby. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch you all then. Go Tigers.